Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of the Recruitment Future podcast. This is a podcast about recruitment innovation.
That was me, launching Recruiting Future 10 years and 699 episodes ago. Keep listening to find out what I've learned from a decade of interviewing the world's most successful TA leaders and how you can be fit for the future. Support for this podcast comes from Smart Recruiters. Are you looking to supercharge your hiring? Meet Winston, Smart Recruiters' AI-powered companion. I've had a demo of Winston. The capabilities are extremely powerful, and it's been crafted to elevate hiring to a whole new level. This AI sidekick goes beyond the usual assistant, handling all the time-consuming admin work so you can focus on connecting with top talent and making better hiring decisions. From screening candidates to scheduling interviews, Winston manages it all with AI precision, keeping the hiring process fast, smart, and effective. Head over to smartrecruiters.com and see how Winston can deliver superhuman results.
There's been more of scientific discovery, more of technical advancement and material progress in your lifetime and mine than in all the ages of history.
Hi there, welcome to episode 700 of Recruiting Future with me, Matt Alder. Well, I want to start by saying thank you to everyone who's helped get Recruiting Future to this 10-year milestone. It's been an amazing journey, and certainly one that isn't done yet. Over the last 10 years, I've interviewed hundreds of TA leaders, as well as CEOs, thought leaders, and the people building the technology that's driving the industry forward. Back in 2015, we thought the pace of change was super fast, and the level of disruption was off the scale, with social and mobile technologies reshaping the way we communicated. In some ways, we might think it was impossible back then to imagine the world that we live in now. But a lot of the changes that we're seeing in TA today have been in the works for a very long time. Here's one of the early interviews that I did for Recruiting Future. This is Laszlo Bock, who at the time of recording, back in May 2015, was the global CHRO at Google.
Well, so our hiring approach used to be, we get 2 to 3 million applications a year. We comb through all of those. We have a bunch of recruiters who do this and do great work doing it. And we would focus historically a lot on where you went to school, what your grades were, what your test scores were, because the idea was we wanted the smartest people we could find. What we since learned was that none of that predicts performance. It's helpful when you're just out of college, but after a year or two, it doesn't matter where you went to school. It doesn't matter what your grades were. So we look beyond that. And what we now look for is 4 things. General cognitive ability, so smarts and problem solving. Emergent leadership, and I could talk about that if you wish.
Yeah, please.
Well, so briefly, emergent leadership so traditional leadership is, were you president of a club? Were you captain of a team? Were you a vice president? Did you get promoted? We don't care about any of that.
Yeah.
What we care about is that when you see a problem, you step in, whether it's your job or not, to help solve it. And just as importantly, when your role is kind of done, you relinquish power and let somebody else step in and you step out. So we look for that. The third thing is what we call googliness. And simply what that means is, kind of cultural fit, but not are you like us. We actually want people to bring something different to the party, something new. We also want intellectual humility and conscientiousness. And then the last and least important thing is expertise. Do you actually know how to do the job?
Okay.
Because again, going back to if you're hiring the right kind of people, bright, curious people, and they meet these other three attributes, they'll figure the rest out.
Although we didn't mention the word skills-based hiring, many of you will recognize this as the core part of the philosophy that sits behind it. The speed of change in talent acquisition is governed by tension between organizational inertia, which slows things down, and external events, like the pandemic, that can cause things to move at lightning-fast speeds. The generative AI revolution is most definitely in the latter category, and we're on the cusp of the most significant changes in TA and recruiting that any of us have ever seen. So, as a TA leader, how do you manage that change and make sure that you and your organisation are fit for the future? Over the last few months, I've been using the power of AI to unlock the Recruiting Future archive and model the mindset and behaviours of the world's most successful TA leaders that I've interviewed. People who've changed the way their organisations think about talent, who thrive on disruption as a catalyst for positive change, and know how to use technology to enable their vision. These leaders all have 4 things in common. They use foresight to understand and shape the future. They build influence with the most senior stakeholders in their organisation. They think differently to create innovative talent strategies, and they use the impact of new technology to accelerate change. Foresight, influence, talent, and technology. Fit. I'm going to dive much deeper into being fit for the future in the coming weeks, with a podcast episode on each element. I'll also be launching an online tool that will help you benchmark yourselves against other TA leaders, as well as playbooks to help you and your team have the strategic impact that you need. If you want to be amongst the first to know when everything launches, head over to mattalder.me/future and let me know. In the meantime, though, here are the thoughts of a selection of practitioners and thought leaders on each element of the FIT framework, drawn from the 10-year archive of Recruiting Future. First of all, foresight. Here's Lisa Monteith, Head of Talent Acquisition and Onboarding for HSBC in the UK, talking about having a proactive approach to the future.
I read a really scary fact today on a piece of research that in the next 10 years, and this was from 2020, and so by 2030, 90% of the UK workforce would need to be retrained because there would be very, very different roles. Now, I think it's incumbent on organisations to be able to provide availability to skills growth, skills development, new acquisition of skill. But I actually think we all, as individuals, have to take responsibility for that too. If we want to remain relevant, if we want to continue to sort of drive our careers in the way that we want them to, then I think we have to drive our own learning for ourselves. And I think traditionally we've waited. There's this culture of, I am going to wait till I'm put on a training course, or I am going to apply to go on a training course. And that would be an in-person training course. And it will be for X number of days. And I will learn this when I'm there. Whereas I think now is very much part and parcel of, bite-sized chunks. There's bite-sized pieces of learning. There's bits of research. There's bits of, if you think about LinkedIn and the various different modules you can pick up there, we have a degree platform at the HSBC. So you can do bite-sized pieces of learning in a number of different ways to build your skill in the time that you've got available. And so I think that, there is still an argument for that in-person training. There's still an argument for all of those different things. But I think as individuals, we have to take charge of our own destiny, because if we wait for organisations to convey that upon us, then I think we're going to be a long time waiting. I'm not talking about HSBC, I'm just talking generically in organisations. I think if we want to remain relevant, we have to take charge of our own learning.
The second element is influence. Here's Lindsay Taylor, Global Head of HR Transformation, Talent Attraction and Global Mobility at Brooks Automation, on the role that TA should be playing in shaping business strategy.
I do believe, Matt, that TA needs to transform. And I believe as a function, we're very good at adapting and being agile enough to transform. And we have been doing as a function for many, many years now. But the nature of the work is rapidly changing due to globalization, remote work, and we can't avoid the topic of any technological advancement. So AI, which does require a much more adaptive and responsive TA function. And, again, forever trying to move away from that transactional role of putting bottoms into seats, which is not TA, I'm sorry, it really isn't, and moving into being more of that strategic business partner to really influence business outcomes and aligning those talent strategies with the organizational goals. But I do feel we have been doing that for a long time. It's just something it's the nature of the beast of TA that we're forever having to adapt to grow with the needs of the business.
No, absolutely. And it's something that gets said
a lot in terms of, TA needs to align itself with the business objectives and those kind of things. How does that actually happen in practice?
It takes time. That would be the first thing I would say. I know in TA we're very driven by metrics and governed by data and outcomes, but actually a lot of this is about not just saying what we're going to do, but doing it. I know that it's a cliche when we talk about TA or HR should be at the table with business leaders, but it's true. And that's one of the important turning points for just HR in general, where you're contributing to discussions about whether it's future workforce needs or the skills that we have today versus the skills we need in the future, and how are we going to bridge that gap, and how are we going to help shape the business strategy through insights into whether it be talent trends or labour market dynamics. And then I would say turning it into reality is what I'm finding. This is my 24th year in TA, and I'm finding that agility is most definitely essential so that TA teams can quickly pivot in response to those changing priorities, where we are leveraging technology to scale efficiently, where we are focusing on measurable outcomes. And then, as we are implementing more and more AI and analytics, not only to streamline processes, but to provide more predictive insights about the future talent needs.
The third element is talent. And this is legendary behavioural scientist Rory Sutherland urging us to think differently about recruiting to ensure we get diversity of thought in organisations. I think one of the really interesting examples that you have in your book is talking about recruiting for diversity of thought, and how in some ways the way that recruitment works is just not set up to deliver that. And actually, if you want diversity of thought in your business, you need to think differently about how you do it.
No, it's actually set up to deliver the opposite of it, because our universities really were developed to produce colonial civil servants. In other words, people who are completely reliable and sensible, but weren't necessarily experimental or wild. Now, you add on to that an additional problem, which is the need to appear fair and objective requires you to apply the same criteria to every applicant, okay? Which means you end up with people who are disproportionately similar. And diversity can't, by the way, be a tick box thing, because in order for it to be meaningful, you have to create an environment in which it's okay to be diverse, and in which you feel comfortable being diverse. And that's not just about ethnic diversity, it's about every kind of diversity.
And what about the process of recruitment? What could companies be thinking about to sort of improve the diversity and diversity of thought that they're bringing into their organisation in terms of how they actually run their recruitment processes?
Well, at Ogilvy, we've made a first step, which is something called the PIPE, which is a parallel system of recruitment of talent, where we don't demand or even consider their university performance or their academic performance. We simply set a variety of exercises to spot people of exceptional, what you might call non-standard ability. Okay. And it's particularly used for recruitment to the creative department, but it also applies elsewhere. And our agency is quite an interesting place because accidentally it's produced an environment which does have a range of cognitive styles or modes, and it generally tolerates them. We've had creative department, planning department, account handling department, finance department. All of those require different skill sets. So one of the things we are doing, and I think it's a very important first step, is to understand that the optimal solution in a complex system is very rarely an average. Really, really important point. I'll give a nice analogy, which I think makes sense of this. Okay, I hate open plan offices because I think they're neither one thing nor the other. They're an attempt to solve for the average. Okay, actually, what you want for productivity is two extremes: a mixture of solitude and sociability. You also need a mixture of very high intensity work, concentrated work, and periods of discretionary free time. And what generally leads to productivity in a knowledge economy is actually a highly varied working environment. So this attempt to optimize for an average is a fatal mistake in any complex system. What you want is an optimal level of variance, not an optimal average, and we're optimizing for the wrong thing. The question should not be what is the perfect working environment to impose on everybody for 35 hours a week, okay? It should be what's the optimal variety we need to provide people with so they can find an environment that best suits their own cognitive style at a time which suits what they're trying to do in the moment. And if you want the real intellectual backdrop to this, the creation of artificial and unhealthy uniformity is a product of top-down thinking and decision-making, where people at the top tend to understand the world through averaging and through aggregation. Lived experience is often about variety. And by the way, in recruitment, if you have a graduate recruitment scheme, you're trying to optimize for the average. Now, one of my suggestions to overcome this is hire people in groups, because then you'll see diversity as complementary, not contradictory. Okay. The only reason I got hired is because they were hiring 4 people and basically they said, okay, let's take a punt on the weirdo. If they had had 4 jobs which they advertised and recruited for separately at Ogilvy back then, I wouldn't have got any of those 4 jobs. Because when you hire in groups collectively, you become more cognizant of variance. When you're hiring one person at a time, you're hiring against a template. And risk aversion also changes, because if you think about it, if you hire 4 people, you can afford to up on one of them. But if you hire on one person, you'll try and hire as close as possible to an expected norm to minimize the risk of blame if your hire doesn't work out.
The fourth element is technology. In this clip, Laura Coccaro, CHRO at iCIMS, talks about the fundamental role talent professionals should be playing in the AI-driven transformation of organizations.
The way that I think about this for myself, for my CHRO colleagues, this is a tremendous opportunity. You know, when we think about everything that's happening in the market right now around AI and how fast it is moving and the impact it will have on our workforce, this is a people transformation. This is not just technology at play. This is about how we're going to figure out how we're leveraging the right set of technology and our broader workforce needs and what that means in terms of skills availability, our need to think about what skill sets we have internally versus those that we need to go out and hire versus those that we can train and really drive, material impact on what's happening across our organizations. One of the things that we know is that this is about driving not just, okay, you can use this in your own house, but every piece of our business is considering new ways of adopting AI. And it's so important that we think about communication, enablement, strong partnership with CEOs and CIOs across our business to not just be a part of this transformation, but actually lead from the front in terms of the material impact that I believe that it will have on organizations in relatively short order.
Finally, one of the best things about running a podcast on the future of recruiting for the last 10 years is the ability to track back and see how the predictions that people made about the future actually panned out. It's very clear that the people who are the most accurate in their predictions were the ones both with a deep understanding of technology and a deep understanding of the human context that technology operates in. There's one person who stands head and shoulders above everyone else, and that's Kevin Wheeler. Here he is back in 2016, talking about what he thought work might look like in 2025.
I think you're going to see a lot of jobs that you and I take for granted today, disappearing or shrinking in volume. That includes things that are really hot right now, like coders. And I think you're going to find a lot of coding becomes automated. I think you're going to see a lot of scripts and modules that can be plugged in to make things work. I think you're going to see simplicity in that space that's going to reduce the number of people required in the coding space. So I think the world of work tends to get on a fad. And I think we've seen this numerous times in the past, where suddenly we need everybody to be something. And then in a short time later, we automate or become more efficient, and we no longer need that many people in those occupations. And I think that's clearly indicated in the case of coders. I think in general, you're going to see a lot of discussion and focus on where should we apply automation and how. And I'm not necessarily a doomsayer that says everything is going to become automated or roboticized, but many things will. I think the question is, if you automate something, what's the role of the human in that automation process? And I think we will find there is a role. I'll give you one good example. It's pretty clear that an airplane pilot can be replaced with automation. There's clearly many articles, many experts out there who are predicting the end of commercial pilots. And while I think that definitely technically is possible, I'm not sure we will ever see a commercial airplane without a pilot. Because I think as human beings, we want someone up there to talk to and communicate with. So that pilot may become more of a generalist, more of a person who can communicate effectively, who can calm fears. And there may be one instead of two up there in the cockpit. So we're going to see changes like that in the changes in the role that people have. We're going to see a lot more augmented people, meaning people that use technology to do things that they couldn't do before. Doctors using robotic operating equipment to operate on you. All sorts of devices that will come out that make us smarter, wiser, able to see further. But they're not necessarily going to just replace us all. But the reality is a lot of jobs are going to become automated and new jobs will emerge.
So I'll be talking a lot more about the Fit for the Future framework over the next few weeks. And again, if you want early access to the online tool, please go to mattalder.me/future to register. That's mattalder.me/future. Thanks again to everyone who's been a guest on the podcast over the last 10 years. Thanks to the sponsors for making it all possible, and thanks to all of you for listening. We can't know exactly what change the next 10 years will bring, but if you want to be one of the leaders driving that change, then make sure you subscribe to Recruiting Future wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks very much for listening. I'll be back next time, and I hope you'll join me.
This is my show.